The construction site had been buzzing since early morning. Huge concrete blocks were lifted by cranes, metal beams clanged, and workers in helmets and vests exchanged loud remarks. The air was filled with the smell of fresh cement and heated iron. Every day here looked the same: noise, dust, hard labor. But today the atmosphere was different, tense. At the gates appeared a tall black man wearing a foreman's helmet. His badge read, Marcus Johnson. He moved calmly and confidently, carrying a folder with construction plans. He had only recently been appointed to oversee this site, and part of the crew had met the news with hostility. The looks from workers, engineers, and supervisors who were used to another order seemed to burn through him. Well, the boss is here, said one of the engineers loudly. A white man around 40, named Tom Richardson, adjusting his glasses. Let's see what he thinks he's going to teach us. Nearby stood two more Steve Miller and Andrew Collins. They exchanged glances and laughed. Probably going to teach us how to hold a shovel properly, Steve sneered. Or how to dance during the lunch break, Andrew added. Laughter rolled across the rows. Marcus stopped, spread the blueprints out on a makeshift table made of wooden pallets, and said calmly, Today we're starting reinforcement on the second section. The crane will arrive in an hour. We need to prepare the site and make sure the beams are set strictly according to the markings. But the workers only half listened. Tom shook his head. Yeah, sure. We've been building for 20 years, and now he's going to tell us where to place the beams. Laughter broke out again. A few younger workers, including Brian and Mike, exchanged uneasy glances but kept silent. Their eyes showed doubt. Was it even worth listening to the new foreman? Marcus, maintaining his composure, picked up a measuring tape and began checking the layout together with one of the operators. But the engineers kept talking behind his back. Honestly, it's laughable, Steve said. Do they really think they can trust a project like this to someone like him? Come on, Andrew replied. The company probably just wanted to save money. Probably couldn't find anyone else. And again came laughter. The workers went about their tasks, setting up the metal structures half-heartedly. Some deliberately slowed down, as if to show they weren't going to take orders from Marcus. He saw every move, noticed every detail, but didn't rush to interfere. A young engineer, David Harris, who had recently graduated from university, approached them. He tried to ease the tension. Maybe we should just listen to what he says? After all, he has the plans. But Tom immediately cut him off. You're too young to teach us, kid. We know better. All this time, Marcus remained a quiet observer. He moved across the site, checking the progress. Sometimes he corrected workers, pointing out mistakes. Each of his comments was met with skeptical smirks. What does he know? Grumbled one of the senior builders, Jack Brown, wiping sweat from his forehead. Anyone can wave around orders. Let's see him try it himself. Gradually, the tension mounted. With every new instruction, Marcus encountered passive resistance. Beams placed incorrectly, concrete mixed later than scheduled, welders in no hurry to check fastenings. All of this could lead to serious problems, but the engineers didn't seem to care. During the lunch break, the group gathered by the tool container. Tom and Steve once again spoke loudly. Did you see him walking around, acting like he owns the place? Yeah, carrying those documents under his arm like that makes him important. I'd love to see how he explains his mistakes to management. Marcus approached, placed the folder on the table, and calmly said, I understand you doubt me, but a construction site is no place for games. If you keep working like this, it will end in an accident. His words hung in the air. The workers exchanged glances, but Tom was the first to speak again. Listen, Marcus, or whatever your name is, we've been building here for years. You're just a random guy, so don't tell us what to do. Laughter erupted again. A few clapped Tom on the back in support. Marcus lifted his gaze, his eyes flashing with steel, but he held back. He opened the folder, pulled out several documents, flipped through them neatly, and placed them on the edge of the table. No one really saw what they were. You're mistaken, he said quietly, but soon you'll know the truth. He turned and walked toward the crane, leaving the engineers puzzled. The laughter slowly died away. The conflict was only beginning to escalate. Marcus was preparing for the moment of truth when he would show everyone who was truly in charge here. The construction site was boiling with activity, but beneath the familiar noise, tension lingered. By noon, the sun beat down on the steel beams, blinding the workers, while dust rose above the unfinished building in a thick cloud. The crane hummed, lifting metal structures. Welders sparked with their torches. Concrete workers waited for the signal to pour the mix. Everything looked like an ordinary working day. But among the people, a rift was growing. Marcus walked around the site with a tablet and a folder, noting discrepancies. His steps were confident, but every order he gave was met with scornful glances or mocking smirks. "Johnson," Tom called out loudly so everyone could hear. "We're done here. No need to check." Marcus approached, examined the beams, measured the level. The metal stood at an angle. He frowned. "If we pour concrete like this, the section will crack. It needs to be reset." Steve smirked. "Of course, Mr. Foreman knows better. 20 years we've been building, and here comes a teacher. Maybe we should all go back to school." A ripple of laughter followed. Even the older men, long tired of disputes, picked up on the mood. Let him try it himself. Marcus straightened up. "Fix it. You've got 20 minutes. "And if we don't?" Andrew sneered, leaning on the rebar. "What will you do, fire us?" Several workers laughed. On a construction site, authority wasn't about titles, but respect. And Marcus, in their eyes, had no right to command them. At that moment, the young engineer David, who had stayed on the sidelines, stepped forward. "He's right. If we leave it like this, there'll be problems." Tom snapped around. "You keep quiet, kid. The adults are working here." The air grew thick with conflict. Even the workers, who had been indifferent, now watched the standoff. Half an hour later came the first incident. Crane operator Bill Sanders, usually disciplined, lowered a metal structure not where Marcus had indicated, but closer to Tom's men. They burst into laughter. "See that? Even the crane listens to us," Steve shouted. Marcus walked over to the operator. "I gave a different order. Watch the signals." Bill shrugged. "Well, I just trust the ones I've worked with for years." The words were loud enough for everyone to hear. To Marcus, it was a challenge. He said nothing. He simply pulled out his phone, took a couple of pictures of the misaligned beam, and scribbled something into his notebook. "What, gonna call the cops?" Andrew shouted. "Or your mom?" The crowd laughed again. By evening, the situation had escalated further. Marcus tried to gather everyone near the site trailer to discuss the next day's plan. Workers dragged their feet, some smoking deliberately, others chatting on the phone. "Tomorrow we start pouring the third section. The foundation check has to be finished today," Marcus said calmly. "Maybe you should check it yourself," Tom said. "We'll just grab some beers while you measure your levels." "Yeah," Steve added. "If you want us to do your job, just say so." Suddenly there was a loud crash. One of the young workers, Brian, had dropped a toolbox. Flushed, he muttered, "Sorry, it's just tense here." Marcus looked at all of them. "I'm not asking you to do my job. I'm asking you to do yours. If you want to laugh, you'll laugh later. Right now, this is a construction site." His voice was calm but firm. For a moment, the workers fell silent, but whispers soon followed. That night, when the site was empty, Marcus returned alone. He walked along the sections, checking every bolt and every weld. His face remained composed, but inside he was boiling. In his folder lay documents that could change everything. But he didn't show them yet. The moment hadn't come. Instead, he left the corrected drawings and a note on the table. Morning will show who's right. The next day promised to be decisive. Rain was in the forecast, and if the beams weren't aligned properly, the structure could warp. The workers either didn't understand or didn't want to. But Marcus was ready. He was waiting for the construction itself to prove him right. And then a black SUV pulled onto the site. Two men in sharp suits stepped out, folders in hand. The workers immediately froze. These visitors were clearly tied to upper management. Noticing them, Tom smirked and whispered to Steve, "Well, let's see how he gets out of this one." Marcus stood nearby, holding his documents. His gaze was focused. A new trial was about to begin. The construction site froze in anticipation. The workers, who only recently had been laughing and arguing, now cast sideways glances at the black SUV. Two men stepped out, both in expensive suits, one tall with silver hair, the other younger, holding a tablet. They looked like client representatives or investors. Marcus stepped forward but didn't speak. He knew every word he said now would be twisted by the workers. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," Tom said first, clearly trying to seize the initiative. "Glad you came. We've got a bit of chaos here." "Chaos?" The tall man, who introduced himself as Mr. Carter, raised an eyebrow. "What exactly do you mean?" Tom nodded toward Marcus. "Management sent us a foreman, but let's just say he's out of his depth. We've been building for 20 years. We know what to do, and he just gets in the way. Makes us redo things that were already right." Steve chimed in. "He wastes time on pointless checks. The whole site stalls." Marcus silently held his folder. Mr. Carter turned to him. "Is that true?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He walked to one of the sections, picked up a level, and placed it against a beam. The bubble showed a tilt. "If we pour the concrete like this, the structure won't bear the load." "Nonsense," Andrew scoffed. "It'll be fine." Mr. Carter frowned but said nothing. The workers grew bolder. They believed the visitors would put Marcus in his place. The site buzzed, and some loudly discussing the rookie's mistakes, others openly mocking. "See how he measures everything?" "Like we're kids," one mason whispered. "He's just scared," Jack snorted. "Knows we don't listen to him." Marcus kept working, showing the visitors each flaw. He didn't argue, only presented facts. But the engineers pushed harder. That evening, they deliberately left part of the work unfinished, trying to show Carter that the project stalled because of Marcus. "Look," Steve said loudly, "nothing's ready, because our foreman doesn't trust us and slows everything down." Mr. Carter looked at Marcus. Marcus calmly took out his phone and showed photos. Beams misaligned, welds with cracks. "I wasn't stalling," he said quietly but firmly. "I was preventing mistakes." The next day things got worse. Clouds rolled in, rain poured. Water flooded the site, and the tilted beams began to shift under the weight. Workers scrambled to place supports, but the structure groaned dangerously. "Damn, it's going to collapse," Brian shouted, rushing for tools. Marcus ordered, "Everyone back, now!" The workers ignored him, determined to prove that nothing was wrong. Then, in an instant, one of the bolts tore loose, and a metal beam crashed to the ground, barely missing Andrew. In a second, all laughter vanished. The site fell silent. "You almost died," David shouted, running to Andrew. "Shut up," Andrew rasped, his face pale as chalk. Marcus pulled out his folder again and made a note. "You see what you're risking," he said. But instead of admitting fault, the workers shouted again, "He's the one to blame. His orders just confuse everything. If we'd done it the old way, nothing would have happened." Even after a near-death accident, they wouldn't yield. By evening, Carter returned to the site. He walked past Marcus, inspected the damaged section, and said, "I see there's no discipline here. Tomorrow we'll conduct an inspection." Tom smiled. "Perfect. Finally, the truth will come out." Marcus nodded silently. He knew. This wasn't over. That night, the workers gathered in the trailer. The air reeked of cigarettes and cheap coffee. They had only one topic: how to get rid of Marcus. "We've got to show he's the problem," Steve said. "Tomorrow's the inspection. If we stick together and say it's his fault, Carter will believe us. And if not?" Brian asked, still shaken from the accident. "What if he proves us wrong?" Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "The key is to all say the same thing. There are many of us. He's just one." They laughed, scheming how to frame Marcus, even suggesting they forget tools or sabotage measurements. Meanwhile, Marcus sat alone in his trailer. In front of him lay the documents that could end the dispute instantly. He could reveal them tomorrow, and no one would question who was in charge. But he knew, if he did it too soon, the workers would never realize their mistakes. They'd just think they were forced to obey. He closed the folder and set it aside. "Let the truth reveal itself," he said quietly. Outside, the rain began again. The steel beams groaned as if sensing a new day full of trials. And tomorrow everyone would have to choose sides, either with the stubborn majority or with the one man who stood alone, certain he was right. The morning began with a troubling hum. A commission arrived at the construction site, 3 cars in a row, from which stepped client representatives, inspectors in helmets, and even a cameraman recording for the company's internal report. The workers bustled about, but the engineers' faces bore smug smiles. Today they were certain. They would finally prove that Marcus was management's mistake. Tom gathered his men in a circle while the commission prepared for the inspection. The key is, we all say the same thing. He slows down the work, gets in the way. Everything's his fault, he said confidently. No one must waver. What if they ask about yesterday's beam incident? Brian asked cautiously. Steve waved it off. We'll say he gave the wrong order. End of story. Andrew added, Carter will believe the majority. We've worked here for decades. Who would trust one man over us? Marcus stood nearby, watching. He understood without words, a conspiracy, a plan. But his face remained calm. The inspection began with the foundation. Inspectors walked with tablets, measuring angles, taking photos. Carter's questions were short and sharp. Why are you 2 days behind schedule? Why aren't the beams secured? Why is the machinery idle? Each time Tom or Steve stepped forward and pointed at Marcus. Ask him. He won't let us work. Marcus listened silently. Sometimes he pulled out his tablet, showing dates, photos, measurements. But the workers drowned him out with shouts. That's a lie. He fakes the records. He delays everything on purpose. The crowd roared, and the commission looked on, bewildered. In moments like these, the loudest always seemed to win. The most tense scene unfolded at the third section. There, materials had been deliberately left scattered, welds intentionally botched. Carter scowled. What is this mess? Andrew stepped forward. We warned him, but he insisted this was correct. Not true, cried young engineer David, his voice trembling but resolute. They did this themselves. I saw them leave it like this last night. The crowd turned toward him, eyes like ice. Shut up, kid, Tom barked. You don't know anything. But David stepped closer to Carter. Look at the photos on his tablet. He pointed at Marcus. He documented everything. The beams were straight, the welds complete. They sabotaged it. Marcus opened his tablet and showed the photos, complete with timestamps. The inspectors bent over the screen. The images were clear. The beams had been aligned, the welds finished. For a moment, silence hung over the site. That's doctored, Steve muttered weakly. He faked it all. But the words sounded hollow, like excuses. Carter looked at the workers as though he was beginning to truly see. The inspection continued, but the tension was at its peak. The workers no longer laughed so boldly, though they tried to keep up appearances. Marcus kept silently noting every detail. Then, during the inspection, the unexpected happened. Under heavy rain, part of the temporary scaffolding collapsed, the very section Tom's men had been responsible for. No one was hurt, but the crash was deafening. The entire site froze. An inspector rushed forward, snapping photos. Who was responsible for this section? Marcus glanced at the paperwork. Responsible Richardson. The crowd buzzed. Tom flushed red, shouting, Again! He blames me! He's just covering himself! But this time, the workers stayed quiet. Even those who had backed him yesterday realized too many accidents were no longer coincidence. By day's end, the commission withdrew for a meeting. The workers remained on site, glaring at Marcus. The silence weighed heavier than noise. Andrew hissed, You think you've won? This isn't over. Tom stepped right up to Marcus, eyes burning with rage. You're nobody here. And soon, everyone will know it. Marcus met his gaze calmly. I already said, the truth will reveal itself. He turned and walked back to his trailer, leaving the crew seething with anger. That night, rain fell again. The site groaned under the wind, beams shuddering. The workers huddled in their shack, whispering, If the commission rules against us tomorrow, we're fired. We can't let that happen. We have to act. They hatched a plan. In the morning, they would sabotage Marcus's documents, steal his folder. Without proof, his words would be nothing. But none of them noticed David standing nearby, overhearing everything. His face was pale, but his resolve hardened. He understood, if he stayed silent, the truth would drown in lies. Morning promised to be even more explosive than the day before. The commission was to deliver its verdict. The workers plotted sabotage, and Marcus still held the documents whose contents remained secret, and all of it loomed over the construction site like a storm about to break. The night was cold and damp. After the rain, the entire site was swallowed in mud. Steel beams glistened under the faint glow of scattered lamps, and the wind snapped the tarps covering building materials. The workers had retreated into their temporary cabins, but inside Tom's trailer, whispers buzzed with urgency. "Tomorrow decides everything," Steve said, nervously drumming his fingers on the table. "If the commission believes him, we're off the site. And if they don't," Andrew smirked, "he'll be thrown out, and everything will go back to normal." Tom poured coffee into a plastic cup and declared, "He's holding all the cards in that folder. Photos, documents, measurements. By morning, it must be gone." "You mean—" Brian began cautiously, but fell silent at Tom's icy stare. "Yes, we'll take his papers. Let him prove himself 100 times over. Without evidence, he's nothing." The men exchanged glances. The plan was risky, but one thought dominated their minds: preserve the old order and get rid of Marcus. In the neighboring trailer, David had been about to close his laptop when the footsteps and muffled voices outside made him pause. Tom's words were clear through the thin wall. David's heart pounded. He knew that in the morning, the real hunt would begin. He paced the small room. On one hand, silence meant safety. No one would bother the young engineer. On the other, he had witnessed the injustice against Marcus and couldn't ignore it. "If I intervene, they'll hate me," he thought. "But if I stay silent, I'm no better than them." He made his decision. In the morning, he would warn Marcus. At 6 a.m., the site came alive. Damp air clung to the ground. A generator droned in the distance. Workers gathered, pretending it was just another day, but their eyes burned with hidden intent. Marcus stepped out of his trailer, the familiar folder tucked under his arm. He circled the site, inspecting the sections for the commission's visit. Tom and Steve exchanged a quick glance. "Today he loses his weapon," Tom muttered. They waited for their moment. David approached Marcus as he checked weld seams. "Sir," his voice trembled, "they're going to steal your documents this morning." Marcus looked at him calmly, as if hearing something he had expected. "I know." "You know?" David blurted. "I can see it in their faces. They can't hide it. But thank you for telling me." Marcus placed a steady hand on his shoulder and added softly, "Today will be loud. Don't be afraid." David stepped back, confused by his words. At 9 a.m., the commission returned. Carter and the inspectors prepared for the decisive inspection. The workers stood aside, tense, exchanging glances. Marcus set his folder on the table in the site office and walked off to check markings. Their chance had come. Steve moved first, pretending to search for tools. In one swift motion, he shoved the folder toward Andrew. Andrew caught it and stuffed it under his jacket. It was over in seconds. "Done," he whispered. "Let's see him squirm now." They rejoined the crowd, feigning indifference. When Marcus returned, he noticed the folder was gone. The workers froze, waiting for his reaction. But he only glanced around and said, "Interesting," and nothing more. The inspection began. Carter demanded, "Where's the photo documentation, the reports?" Tom stepped forward, triumphant. "See? He's got nothing. We told you." Marcus met Carter's gaze silently. "The documents will be here. Give me a minute." He pulled out his phone, tapped quickly, and on the large presentation screen the inspectors had brought, the very same photos and records appeared. Dates, signatures, measurements, everything. Gasps filled the site. Andrew turned pale. "But how?" he whispered. "I always keep copies," Marcus said calmly. At that moment, David stepped forward, his voice loud and steady. "I confirm. Last night they deliberately left the beams crooked. They conspired to frame him. I heard them planning to steal his documents." A dead silence gripped the site. All eyes locked on Tom, Steve, and Andrew. "You lie!" Tom shouted, but his voice lacked its old strength. Carter raised a hand to silence the crowd, his eyes narrowing. I think we need to have a separate talk with you three. Inspectors led Tom and his group aside. The remaining workers looked around uneasily, hesitant to speak. Marcus stood motionless, as if everything had been part of the plan. He didn't gloat or scold. He only looked at the others, the same men who had mocked him just yesterday. Rain began to drizzle again. The commission withdrew into the office trailer for deliberation. The workers remained outside, whispering nervously. Their stares carried less mockery now, but far more fear and uncertainty. Standing off to the side, Marcus opened his tablet and wrote a new note. Today, they almost crossed the line. Tomorrow, everything will be clear. His identity remained a mystery, but everyone sensed it. Behind this man stood something much greater than a simple title. And tomorrow, the truth could strike harder than any rain or falling beam. The day of inspection was not yet over. After the morning scandal, when the attempt to steal the documents failed, the site sank into heavy silence. Workers pretended to stay busy, but every move seemed uncertain. No one laughed openly anymore, though their eyes still burned with resentment and anger. The commission withdrew to the office trailer for deliberation, leaving everyone in suspense. Tom and his allies were allowed to remain, but Carter made it clear, one more violation, and they would be immediately removed. Stay calm, Tom hissed to his men. This isn't over. If he thinks we'll just back down, he's wrong. Steve nodded. We still have a chance. The commission hasn't decided yet. That means we can show he's unfit to lead. We need a provocation, Andrew added, clenching his fists. Put him in a situation where he'll break. An hour later, Carter returned to the workers. His voice was stern. We haven't reached a final decision. But one thing is clear, discipline here is broken. Today, you will continue working under the commission's supervision. We want to see how the process is managed. The crowd stirred. Workers exchanged glances. Tom smirked. This was the chance. Perfect, he said loudly. Let him prove he can lead. Marcus nodded. It was as though he had been waiting for exactly this. Work began on reinforcing the fourth section. Marcus gave calm, precise instructions, checking levels, distributing tasks. Some workers obeyed without protest, but Tom's men moved deliberately slow. They muttered, rolled their eyes, and staged pointless bustle. Faster, Marcus said evenly. We need to finish by noon. And if we don't, Steve shouted, what then will you blame us in your report? A few men chuckled. The commission observed closely, taking notes. Marcus ignored the taunts. He only documented every misstep. Who failed to secure bolts? Who left rebar crooked? Then Tom went further. When the crane began lifting a heavy beam, Tom flashed the operator a subtle hand signal. The beam swung too quickly and too low. Workers underneath barely scrambled away. A thunderous crash shook the site. The metal slammed into the ground, dust billowing upward. Damn! Brian cried, wiping his face. That could have killed someone. Crane error, Tom said smoothly, but his eyes darted toward Marcus. Just proves he can't organize the work. The commission whispered anxiously. Inspectors snapped photos. Carter frowned. This is serious. Marcus stepped forward, fixing his gaze on the crane operator. His voice was firm. My signals were different. The lift should have been slower, 2 meters higher. Liar, Steve shouted. Everyone saw you motion down. That's right, Andrew chimed in. He gave the order, and now he's blaming others. The crowd buzzed. Workers split some siding with the engineers, others staying silent, afraid to choose. Carter turned to Marcus. Do you have proof? Without arguing, Marcus activated his tablet and showed footage from a surveillance drone over the site. On the screen, it was clear. His hand signaled upward, while Tom, standing off to the side, motioned down. This was a setup, Marcus said calmly, and it nearly cost your workers their lives. All eyes turned to Tom. His face blanched, but he quickly snapped back. What if he faked the video? With him, things always appear out of thin air. But even some of his supporters exchanged uneasy looks. The moment had been too clear. The commission halted the work and withdrew again for discussion. The site was left in disarray. Unity had crumbled. Whispers spread that Tom had gone too far. He'll drag us all down, Brian murmured. I don't want to die because of his games. But Tom refused to yield. Listen to me, he shouted. Everything he does is against us. If we don't stop him today, tomorrow we'll all be out of jobs. We must stay together. His words were forceful, but panic seeped through his voice. Marcus watched quietly from the side. He didn't intervene. In his hands were still the folder and the tablet, but he didn't open them. He was waiting. That evening, Carter gathered everyone near the office trailer. The inspectors' faces were tense. We cannot issue a final verdict today, Carter announced. We need more time to analyze, but let this be clear. If there's one more incident tomorrow, the guilty will be removed from the project immediately. The crowd stirred uneasily. Tom tried to smile, but his lips trembled. Marcus simply nodded and said softly, "Tomorrow." The word rang out as if he knew exactly that tomorrow would be the turning point. Night brought rain again. Workers sat in their trailers, sleepless. The air was electrified with fear, anger, and expectation. David stayed by the window, watching as Marcus walked the site alone under the rain, inspecting beams and rebar step by step, as though preparing for Judgment Day. At the other end of the site, Tom was gathering his men once more. His voice was sharp, full of venom. Tomorrow we go all the way, even if we have to sabotage the whole site. And no one yet knew that in the morning, something would happen on that site that would change everything forever. The morning began with the clang of metal and nervous voices. The site came alive earlier than usual. Workers bustled about, some shouting orders, others rushing the lifts. An anxious energy hung in the air. Everyone knew today would be decisive. Marcus appeared as calm as ever, with his helmet and tablet in hand. He walked the site section by section, jotting notes into the blueprints. Workers shot him angry glances, but no one dared say anything aloud. Only Tom, flanked by Steve and Andrew, smirked darkly. "Today he'll break," Tom hissed, clenching his fist. "Today everyone will see he can't handle it." "And if not?" Brian asked quietly. "Yesterday almost turned into disaster. And still he came out clean?" "Then today will be a real accident," Tom replied. "One even he won't escape." By 9 a.m. day, the commission returned. Carter and the inspectors looked weary. They had clearly spent the night debating reports. Cameras once again recorded every move. "Today," Carter said, "and we observed the full process. No exceptions." Marcus nodded and gave the first instructions. Crews spread out to their sections. On the surface, it looked like ordinary work, but the tension was palpable, as though each step could spark tragedy. The provocation began subtly. Steve slipped the wrong tool into the welder's kit. They realized too late and fell behind schedule. Andrew deliberately gave the wrong measurements to the concrete team, causing the formwork to be placed half a meter off. Marcus moved through the site, correcting each mistake. "Take it down, redo it," he said evenly. "Welding only after inspection." Workers grumbled, exchanged glances, but complied. "See?" Tom muttered. "He makes us redo everything. We'll lose half a day because of him." Carter watched carefully, withholding judgment. By noon, the tension peaked. The crane began lifting a massive beam for the 5th section. The operator awaited Marcus's signal, but Tom deliberately flashed a false hand sign. The beam started swinging toward a group of workers. "Watch out!" David shouted, rushing forward. Marcus raised his hand sharply, signaling stop. The operator hesitated, unsure whom to obey. The beam swayed, scraped, and struck the scaffolding. With a deafening crash, the structure collapsed. Dust exploded. Shouts rang out. One worker fell, striking his shoulder on the concrete. Thankfully, no severe injuries. But the sight shook everyone. Inspectors rushed to document the scene. Carter, pale, looked between Marcus and the engineers. "This is no accident," he said quietly, but loud enough for all to hear. The crowd buzzed. Some workers helped the injured man. Others wiped dust from their faces. "It's his fault," Steve shouted, pointing at Marcus. "He gave the wrong signal." "No!" David's trembling voice rose above the noise. "I saw Tom signal. He diverted the beam." All eyes turned to Tom. His face tightened, but he forced composure. "This boy is just covering for him. We all saw otherwise." "We all," Marcus said coldly. "Or just the three of you." The words landed like a blow. The crowd fell silent. Even those who had mocked Marcus yesterday now kept quiet. The truth was too plain. Carter stepped forward. "I want the video. Now." Marcus brought up footage from a crane-mounted camera. On the screen, his signal was clearly stop, while Tom, off to the side, made a subtle motion downward. A murmur swept through the workers. They stared at the engineers with disbelief and fear. Even their allies began to edge away. "You endangered lives," Carter said, his voice shaking with anger. "This is sabotage," inspectors scribbled furiously. Steve and Andrew tried to protest, but their words drowned in the uproar. Marcus stood motionless. He said nothing. He didn't need shouts or arguments. The facts spoke louder. Tom stepped toward him, his face twisted with rage. "You think you've won? You think they'll believe you forever? This isn't over." "The end is near," Marcus replied calmly, "but not for me." Workers exchanged glances. For the first time, their eyes showed not just doubt, but respect. By evening, the commission withdrew to deliberate. The engineers were barred from the meeting, left waiting under guard like suspects. Silence descended over the site. Small groups of workers whispered among themselves. And for the first time, Marcus's name was not spoken with mockery. David approached him. "You knew they'd try this?" "Yes," Marcus answered. "The question was only when." "And now? What happens?" Marcus glanced toward the trailer, where the commission deliberated. "Tomorrow we'll have the answer." Rain fell again that night, but now it felt different, as if it washed away not just mud, but old illusions. Workers sat quietly, each wondering what awaited them. Marcus sat in his trailer, the same folder of documents before him. He did not open it. He was waiting. One more day, and everything would change. The morning arrived gray and heavy, as though the weather itself reflected the mood on the site. Thick fog wrapped the construction area, turning the steel structures into ghostly giants rising from the ground. Workers gathered in groups. No one spoke loudly, and the laughter that had become so common in previous days was gone. Everyone waited for the commission's verdict, but in the air there lingered something else, a sense that the confrontation wasn't finished. Marcus emerged from his trailer later than usual. His figure radiated calm confidence, as though he had no doubt the day would tip in his favor. He walked along the sections, inspecting everything personally, then stopped at a group of welders. "Be especially careful today. Any mistake now comes at too high a cost." The welders nodded silently. In their eyes flickered something new: respect. Meanwhile, at the other end of the site, Tom, Steve, and Andrew whispered beside a container wall. Their faces were pale, but their eyes burned with resolve. "If the commission rules today, we're finished," Tom said. "They already look at us like criminals." "Then we won't let them rule," Steve growled. "Everything must collapse before they announce the verdict." "And how exactly?" Andrew asked nervously, glancing around. "An accident, a real one. We'll sabotage the concrete pumps. When the pouring starts, the system will fail, the mix will spill, and the project will be halted for at least a month. He'll take the blame." Andrew hesitated. "That's too risky." "We have no choice," Tom snapped. "Otherwise, it's the end of us three." By noon, the commission arrived. Carter stepped out first, his face stern. Workers exchanged uneasy glances. The decision was close. But instead of announcing it, Carter said, "Today we run the final test. We want to see the concrete foundation poured. It must be flawless. After this, we'll give our verdict." The crowd buzzed. Everyone knew this was the most crucial stage. A mistake here could mean catastrophe. Marcus calmly issued orders. Check the pumps, set the formwork, secure the beams. His voice was firm, steady, unwavering. But Tom's men were already moving. While preparations went on, Steve loosened a valve on the backup pump. Andrew quietly cut through a plastic feed hose. They knew that under pressure, the system would burst. It began smoothly. The pump roared to life, concrete slurry flowing through the pipes. Workers took their positions, keeping an eye on levels. The commission observed with cold detachment. Marcus's eyes narrowed on one pump. Something in its rhythm was off. He stepped closer, listening. Then, suddenly, he raised his hand sharply. "Stop! Cut the feed now!" But it was too late. First came a sharp crack, then slurry sprayed wildly from the hose, splattering across the site. Workers screamed, shielding themselves from the sticky mass. The pump rattled, and in the next instant, a metal hose tore free. A booming crash, a fountain of concrete shouts. One young worker was knocked down, slammed by the stream, while others rushed to help. The commission leapt up. Cameras caught everything live. Carter went pale. "What's happening here?" Marcus acted instantly. He hit the emergency switch, cutting the feed, then checked the fallen worker. The boy was alive, only bruised. "Everyone clear out," Marcus ordered. "Check the pressure on all pumps." But the engineers pressed their attack. Tom stepped forward, shouting so all could hear, "There's your proof! He pushed the site into disaster. We warned you." "It's his fault," Steve added. "He didn't check the equipment in advance." The crowd roared, but not with the same certainty as before. Too many had seen Marcus try to stop it, and the coincidence looked too deliberate. David, covered in splattered concrete, stepped forward. "I saw them messing with the pumps this morning. They did this." "Liar!" Andrew screamed, though his voice cracked. Carter turned to the inspectors. "Check the equipment, now." An hour later, the truth was undeniable. A valve had been loosened, a hose cut. The marks of sabotage were fresh. The tool scratches plain to see. The inspectors returned to Carter, who stepped before the crowd. His voice was cold and final. "This is sabotage. Those responsible will be removed and handed to the police." Silence crushed the site. Tom turned white. Steve and Andrew exchanged panicked glances. Some workers stepped away from them, as if afraid to share their downfall. Marcus stood motionless. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Events had unfolded just as he had foreseen. When the police car took the engineers away, the atmosphere shifted. Workers looked at Marcus differently now. Some with respect, others with fear. But no one laughed anymore. David approached quietly. "Today could have ended in tragedy, but you knew. You knew they would try." Marcus closed the folder he'd been holding all along and replied, "It's not about who knows. It's about who's willing to act right." He turned and walked along the sections, leaving everyone in heavy silence. The commission still hadn't announced its verdict. Carter said only, "Tomorrow, we deliver our decision." That tomorrow hung over the site like a storm cloud. No one knew exactly what the inspectors would decide, but everyone understood. The fate of the project and all its people now hung by a thread. And in his trailer, Marcus opened the folder once more, flipping through its pages. Just one more day, and the secret he carried would finally be revealed. The morning when the commission was to deliver its final verdict began unusually quiet. Even the usually noisy site seemed to hold its breath. Workers gathered in small groups, speaking in whispers as if afraid to disturb the air. Tension was palpable in every glance, in every uneasy movement. Everyone knew. Today, the fate of the project would be decided along with the fate of dozens of men, and above all, Marcus himself. He appeared on time, calm and confident as always. His stride was steady. The folder rested casually in his hands, and his gaze was firm. But this time, there was a different resolve in his movements. It seemed he was done with endurance. Today, he would reveal his cards. The commission arrived late, heightening the anxiety. Carter stepped out first, followed by inspectors, a cameraman, and several men in dark suits. The workers froze. Such guests meant the decision would be public and final. "We are ready to announce the results," Carter said. "But before we deliver our verdict, Mr. Johnson has requested to make a statement." Marcus stepped forward. The workers exchanged looks. Some gazed at him with respect, others with unease, and a few still with lingering contempt. But no one spoke. "Several weeks ago," Marcus began, his voice steady, "I came to this site as the new foreman. For many of you, it was a surprise, and instead of cooperation, I was met with distrust, mockery, and sabotage. Someone coughed, someone else lowered his eyes. I was laughed at. I was told I was nobody, that I had no right to give orders. But I kept working. I checked every bolt, every beam. I saw you deliberately make mistakes, and I knew one day it would lead to tragedy." His voice grew sharper. Yesterday's accident was no accident. It was sabotage. The commission investigated, and those responsible have already faced consequences. He paused, looking directly into the worker's eyes. But today, it is time to tell the whole truth. He laid the folder on the table and opened it. Inside were documents, contracts, deeds of ownership, board decisions. Carter nodded to the cameraman, who zoomed in. "I am not just your foreman," Marcus said. "I am the owner of this construction company and this project." The silence that fell over the site was as if time had stopped. Workers stood frozen, unable to believe. Some instinctively removed their helmets. One man crossed himself nervously. "All the documents are here," Marcus continued, holding up the papers. "The land, the equipment, the investor contracts. It all belongs to me. I hired you to work, but you decided my skin made me less worthy." His voice turned cold. "You were wrong." The crowd erupted in whispers. Some looked at him in awe, others in fear. David, standing closest, smiled in relief. "I knew you weren't just a foreman." Tom, pale, stepped forward. This is impossible. You're lying." Marcus turned to Carter. "Confirm it." Carter stepped forward and declared clearly, "Last night we received confirmation. Mr. Marcus Johnson is the CEO and owner of the development company. All documents are valid." The words struck like a hammer. The crowd broke into murmurs. Some whispered. Others clutched their heads. Everyone understood. The world in which Marcus was nobody had collapsed. Marcus spoke again. "Yesterday you laughed at me. Today you laugh less. Tomorrow you'll understand the world is changing. I gave you a chance to work honestly. Many of you chose otherwise: sabotage, lies, mockery." He paused, his voice dropping but hardening. "Those who worked honestly will stay. Those who thought themselves above others will go. This is not revenge. It is justice." Some workers exchanged frightened looks. Steve and Andrew lowered their heads, knowing their time was up. "Tomorrow the construction begins anew," Marcus concluded, "but without those who hinder instead of build." Again, silence gripped the site. No one moved. Every man knew. Today, each of them had made their choice. The commission gave its verdict. The project would continue under Marcus Johnson's leadership. The saboteurs would be dismissed and prosecuted. When Carter and the inspectors departed, the site emptied slowly. Workers dispersed in silence, heavy with the weight of change. Marcus stood at the entrance, staring at the towering steel frames fading into the fog. His voice was quiet but resolute. This site will now be a symbol that no one has the right to treat another as second class. And no one dared to object. After that day, the site seemed like a different place. Those who had once laughed openly and sneered at Marcus now lowered their eyes, careful not to cross his path. The atmosphere of mockery had been replaced by heavy silence. Workers followed orders without argument, working faster and with fewer mistakes. But in the air there lingered not only discipline, there was fear. Marcus walked the site as calmly as before, but now every move carried weight. No one dared question his words. Everyone knew he owned this project, and he held their futures in his hands. David, the only one who had supported Marcus from the start, felt the shift keenly. Workers now looked at him with envy and even respect. He understood. By taking a risk once, he had chosen the winning side. Tom, Steve, and Andrew never returned. They had been escorted off the site by police officially for sabotage and endangering lives, unofficially erased from the story. Their names were no longer spoken, as if they had never existed. Marcus never gloated. He never uttered a harsh word about those who fell victim to their own hatred. For him, justice had spoken for itself. But the remaining workers were still unsure how to act. Some felt shame and regret, others a quiet bitterness for not having supported Marcus when it mattered most. "I wanted to apologize," said Jack, the senior builder who had once grumbled and mocked the loudest. "We thought you were just an outsider, but it turns out—" Marcus looked at him calmly. "I'm not an outsider. I'm the one who gave you work. But respect doesn't come from titles or papers. It comes because we build together. Those words became a turning point. For the first time, the men realized that on a site there is no greater or lesser. Each carries responsibility, and only working together can lead to success. Days passed more swiftly. The site came alive. Crane operators worked smoothly, concrete teams stopped bickering, welders delivered without delay. Marcus still checked every detail, but now his instructions were received not as nitpicking, but as experience and care for safety. David became his right hand. The young engineer gained confidence, and Marcus allowed him to make his first independent decisions. Workers saw this and understood. A new generation of leaders was rising, not by skin color or stereotype, but by talent and fairness. The final milestone came a month later, when the foundation was complete. The commission returned, not for inspection, but for a ceremonial visit. Steel frames towered proudly, each bolt and beam set in place. Carter shook Marcus's hand. You've proven this site is destined for success under your leadership. And not just because of your documents, you achieved what few could: you change people's attitudes. Marcus only nodded. To him, it wasn't a personal victory, it was a reminder for everyone. That day, he gathered the workers and said, I know many of you feel ashamed. And that is right. But shame can be the start of change. I hold no grudge. I ask only one thing. Work honestly and respect each other, not me, each other. If we can achieve that here, then this building we're raising will not just be a structure, it will be a symbol. For the first time, real applause broke out. Not polite, not forced, genuine. At sunset, Marcus stood at the edge of the site, watching the men head home. For the first time in a long while, they looked calm, confident. David approached. You knew it would end like this, didn't you? Marcus gave the faintest smile. I only knew one thing. Truth is always stronger than hatred. Sometimes it takes time, sometimes sacrifice, but truth wins. He raised his eyes to the steel frames stretching into the sky. This building will rise, and with it, so will the people who built it. And so it happened. The project continued without scandal or sabotage. The name Marcus Johnson was no longer tied to outsider or foreman. It became the name of a man who had proven that respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned. And every bolt in that building, every poured slab, carried the memory that no skin color, no prejudice can stop the one who stands with truth and justice.